Today you will learn how dramatically the very representative Qatar Masters 2023 tournament ended for the 20-year-old Indian Erigaisi. Let's look at the standings before the last round. As you can see, the Indian was half a point ahead of a very strong group of pursuers. It was enough for him to draw in order not to lose his leadership. His opponent was the Uzbek chess player Abdusattorov, who was in 7th place with 6 points, and who, naturally, was only interested in victory. And he starts with the move c4, to which black responds with e6, knight c3, pawn d5, pawn d4. Pawn c6, and on the fourth move of the calm Slovenian defense Natbek demonstrates all his aggressiveness, pawn e4. The pawn takes e4, the knight takes e4, the bishop b4 checks, and here white has two options for development, either returning the knight to c3, or closing with the bishop. Bishop d2, sacrificing the d4 pawn. Nadirbek chooses the sharper second option, bishop d2, queen takes d4, bishop takes b4, queen takes e4, and bishop e2. White offers another pawn, g2. Let's see what Abdusattorov meant by sacrificing the second pawn. Queen takes g2. Bishop f3. Queen g5. Knight e2. Knight d7. Rook g1. Queen h4. Rook takes g7. Queen takes h2. Rook g3. Queen h4. Knight c3. Knight f6. Queen d6. Pawn c5. Bishop takes c5. Knight takes c5. Queen takes c5. Knight d7. Queen c7. Queen d4. Knight b5. Queen b6. Queen takes b6. Knight takes b6. Pawn c5. King e7. Knight c7. Rook b8. Pawn takes b6. Pawn takes b6. Rook g4. Bishop d7. Rook c1. Rook g8. Rook takes g8. Rook takes g8. With white advantage. Therefore, black does not take the g2 pawn, but plays the knight a6, the bishop d6, and now they are taking the g2 pawn. Since the d6 square is occupied by the bishop and the queen will no longer be able to penetrate there. Queen takes g2. Bishop f3. Queen g5. Knight e2. Knight e7. Knight g3. And black, of course, plays pawn e5, opening the way for his light-squared bishop. Nadirbek quickly and confidently plays queen b3, and the speed of decision-making shows that this position is well known to the players. Castling. Pawn h4. White is moving forward uncompromisingly. Black has only one answer, queen f6. Of course the knight is e4. Attacking the queen, protecting the bishop and activating the knight. Queen e6 is the only continuation. White responds with a long castling, completely unaware of the position of his king on the c-file. Let me remind you that white plays without two pawns. But the position of their figures is much more active. Blacks need to be very precise. Rook e8, exact move. Rook g1. Knight f5. Black responds. White responds with a strong move bishop h5. Threatening knight g5. Black plays knight d4. Which is not the best continuation. It was still necessary to try queen h5, after king b1 a trap. Can't take the bishop because of the fork on f6. Or it could be like this. 18. Queen h6 check. King b1. Knight d4. The rook takes d4. The pawn takes d4. The bishop takes f7, check. The king takes f7. Queen f3 check. King g8. Knight f6 check. The queen takes f6. The queen takes f6. Rook e1 check. Knight c2. Bishop f5 check. The queen takes f5. The rook takes g1. Queen e6 check. With white's advantage. So, black played knight d4, white played queen d3, pawn g6, pawn f4, pawn c5, reinforcing his knight. White, in turn, reinforces his bishop. The pawn takes e5. Knight b4, queen f1, and queen f5. Black does not go for this option, but offers an exchange of queens, obviously to simplify the game, queen f5. Even winning the exchange did not interest white here. Rook takes d4. After the pawn takes d4. The knight f6 checks. The king h8. The bishop takes b4. The rook takes e5 and we get two minor pieces for the rook and two pawns. Moreover, the bishop needs to go somewhere. Bishop d1. Bishop e6. Bishop d6. Bishop takes c4, of course, this is a trap. The bishop cannot be taken due to the rook c8, knight g4. If the bishop takes e5, then the queen takes e5. Knight g4. Queen e6. Queen f4. Rook d8. Rook e1. Queen f5. The queen takes f5. The pawn takes f5. Knight e5. Bishop e6. Bishop f3. This turns out to be a knight for 3 pawns and a slight advantage for white. The idea of the move knight g4 is this. The bishop takes e1, white the bishop takes e5 check. The pawn f6. The bishop takes f6 check. The king g8. The knight h6 check, and as a result, a big material advantage. Black, apparently, calculated all this and played. The queen takes f1. The bishop takes e5 check. The king g8. The rook takes f1. The bishop takes f1. And approximately equality on the board. What followed knight f6 check? King g7. King d2. Bishop g2. Pawn b4. Pawn h6. Bishop b3. King f8. The bishop takes d4. King e7. King e3. And here Erigasi has very little time left, only a few minutes on 4 move. Pawn b6. Knight g4. Bishop h3. The idea is simple. Deprive white of the advantage of 2 bishops. If a knight eats a pawn, the knight takes h6, then the bishop e6 you have to exchange bishops, or give up the pawn, saving the knight, bishop d1. After the bishop exchange it could have been like this. The bishop takes e6. The king takes e6. Knight g4. Rook c8. King d3. Rook c1. Knight f2. King d5. Bishop c3. Rook g1. Knight e4. Rook d1 check. Knight d2. Pawn a6 with approximate equality. Therefore, white reinforces the knight, king f4. Pawn g5 check. Pawn takes g5. Pawn takes g5. King g3. Bishop takes g4. King takes g4. Rook d8. Bishop a1. Quite readable position. Rook d3. Knight takes g5. Pawn a5. Pawn takes a5. Pawn takes a5. Bishop c4. Rook d2. King f4. Pawn a4. Bishop c3. Rook h2. King f5. And here Erigasi had a large choice of how to play. For example, Rook c2, he had 19 minutes of time and he played Rook h4 and grabbed his head, followed by Bishop f6 check. There was nothing left to do but admit defeat. This is how the Indian chess player dramatically went from being the leader of the tournament to becoming its main loser. As a result, 2 chess players overtook him on this turn, gaining an equal number of points and, according to the conditions of the tournament, they played for first place in 2 games. But perhaps I'll tell you about this in the future. If you like the review, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, write a comment and like it.